Hey everyone, this is Pete, and for this doscember video I thought we'd take a look at several MS-DOS games I was always curious about back in the day, but which I never got a chance to play for one reason or another. As with the video I did like this for the Atari ST, for the most part I'm not judging these games by modern standards. I'm interested in just two things. Would I have enjoyed these games if I had picked them up back in the day? And am I interested in exploring them further now? Let's get right into it. Released in 1993 by Epic MegaGames, Ken's Labyrinth was one of the first Wolfenstein 3D clones, as other first-person shooters became known prior to the release of Doom, at which point they became known as Doom clones. Ken's Labyrinth casts you in the role of yourself. Aliens have captured your dog Sparky, ostensibly because dogs are the most intelligent creatures on planet Earth. It's your job to battle your way through the alien testing grounds, recover Sparky, then defeat the aliens' invasion plans once and for all by taking down their mysterious overlord, Ken. Ken's Labyrinth was programmed by a young Ken Silverman, who would subsequently go on to develop the wonderful build engine that powered all-time classics such as Duke Nukem 3D, Shadow Warrior, and Blood. While Ken's Labyrinth is considerably more primitive than the build engine, it's a block-based raycasting engine similar to Wolfenstein 3D, but built independently by Silverman rather than simply using id Software's code, it still provides a hint of what was to come. Build engine games were well known for featuring a large number of interactive elements in their levels, many of which were set in convincing real-world environments. While Ken's Labyrinth is in a deliberately abstract environment, justified by the narrative as it being a testing ground for aliens to judge the worth of humanity, it still features interactive elements such as vending machines and one-armed bandits. Many levels even feature a full map projected onto one of their walls, complete with a moving dot that marks your current position. Not quite an auto-map facility, but enough for you to figure out where secret areas might be. I never played Ken's Labyrinth back in the day, not even the shareware version, because although I enjoyed Wolfenstein and Spear of Destiny, I was put off a little by the description of Ken's Labyrinth as a clone. Assuming it to be a very similar experience to Wolfenstein, I didn't make it a particular priority to check out. That, it transpires, was a silly thing to do, because Ken's Labyrinth has a very distinctive feel to it that makes it stand out as far more than a simple clone of Wolfenstein 3D. For starters, the atmosphere is completely different. The colourful graphics and the oddly uplifting music give Ken's Labyrinth an altogether unique atmosphere, and it actively makes you want to play more. It feels like a game that wants you to enjoy yourself, and that feeling continues as you progress through its increasingly labyrinthine levels. Secondly, the fact that both you and the enemies make use of projectile weapons rather than hit-scan weapons means that it plays quite differently to Wolfenstein. For the unfamiliar, hit-scan weapons have invisible bullets whose endpoint is calculated pretty much the moment you fire your weapon, making them quite difficult to dodge via any means other than simply breaking line of sight with your enemy. Projectile weapons, meanwhile, fire out a visible sprite, quite a large one in the case of Ken's Labyrinth, which means you can actively dodge them. There's also a strong focus in simply keeping away from enemies in Ken's Labyrinth, since most of them will drain your health rapidly while they're in contact with you. I really like what I've played of Ken's Labyrinth so far. Its distinctive atmosphere and the way it truly embraces being a video game is quite refreshing, and it's just enjoyable to engage with. Other folks do seem to suggest it gets a bit tiresome towards the end of its run of levels, but I do feel I'll get quite a lot out of the game before I start feeling that sort of fatigue. This is definitely a game I'll be spending some more time with. I just regret that I never checked it out back in the day, because I feel like it would have become a fixture on my family PC's hard drive. A definite hearty thumbs up for this one then. Released in 1993 by French developer Cocktail Vision and brought to the United States by Sierra Online, Lost in Time is an adventure game I always wanted to try back in the day because, like many of Cocktail Vision's other titles, it was making a concerted effort to combine the increasingly fashionable multimedia trend with some actual gameplay. For those who weren't around in the early to mid-90s, Multimedia was a term used in the PC space to describe systems with more advanced audiovisual and storage capabilities than had come in the past, allowing them to have much more extravagant presentation in their software. A multimedia PC was a mid to high performance PC equipped with a sound card and CD-ROM drive, opening up access to all manner of interactive entertainment and reference material. More often than not, multimedia content included what was known as full motion video, that is to say digitized footage of real people, places and things, although often at a lower frame rate than we were accustomed to seeing on our televisions and rarely filling the screen, at least in the early days. PC gaming, of course, jumped on the multimedia trend with the concept of the interactive movie, a story-based game that was primarily built from video sequences, occasionally offering the player a choice of how to proceed, or some limited means of interacting with the various scenarios. While technically impressive at the time, many interactive movies disappointed critics by feeling like a significant step backwards from earlier adventure games, which prided themselves on their interactivity. I mention all this because Lost in Time was a deliberate attempt to redress that balance. It features distinctly multimedia elements such as video sequences, speech and pre-rendered environments, considerably beyond what computers at the time could generate in real time. But it combines these with the level of interactivity one would expect from a typical point-and-click adventure. And it works, with one or two caveats. Lost in Time casts you in the role of Doralice Prunellier, a 27-year-old woman. The game opens with her waking up inside a ship with no idea of how she got there, and it becomes increasingly clear that she has somehow been cast out of her own time. Taken in isolation, this opening is completely baffling, particularly as Doralice makes reference to events that you haven't seen take place. However, if you take a moment to read the game's manual, it becomes a little clearer what is going on. Doralice is about to get swept into a futuristic manhunt, where the space-time police from the year 2092 are in pursuit of a villain known as Jarlath, who has stolen a valuable radioactive material that could destabilize the time continuum. What follows is a sequence of puzzles in which you, as Doralice, must interact with various items and combine inventory objects together in order to complete various tasks. It's standard adventure game fare, in other words. From what I've played of Lost in Time so far, it does seem like a reasonably decent adventure game, though it does lack a few expected features such as being able to look at your inventory items and perhaps glean some clues from them. The game also has a bit of a habit of throwing a bunch of puzzles at you, then dumping some story on you, then throwing more puzzles at you, rather than allowing the plot to unfold organically as you play. The game's disparate graphic styles, including pre-rendered 3D environments, digitized photographs and hand-painted backdrops, were seen as a selling point back in the day, but today look a little jarring when you switch from one to another. I doubt that would have mattered to me back in the early 90s, however, because the novelty of playing a multimedia adventure game with some actual meat on the bones would have overridden pretty much everything. Reviewers back in the day also had a bit of a mixed response to it. Writing in PC Zone, my magazine of choice at the time, reviewer Paul Presley described the game as technologically gifted but communicably challenged, and criticised its ending, and indeed the game's entire third chapter, as being rather unsatisfying. After what was a very promising start, he said, the game tends to fall away towards the end as if everyone involved just wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible. It's a shame, because had more time been spent developing a really gripping ending, Lost in Time might have been on for a nomination in the Best Adventure Game of 1993 award. As it is, I think it's just on for Best Special Effects and the Richard Attenborough Most Innovative Contribution to the Adventure Game Genre award. While I have a few complaints about the way Lost in Time does things from today's perspective, and Presley's comments about the ending are a bit disappointing, I feel like I definitely would have enjoyed this back in the day, and without easy access to online walkthroughs, it would have likely kept me busy for a while too. A thumbs up for this one from the perspective of younger me then, though today's me is in two minds as to whether or not to go back and explore this further. Yet another game released in 1993, evidently a good year for PC gaming from my perspective. MegaRace was developed by Cryo and published by the Software Toolworks. Like Lost in Time, it's very much a multimedia game, boasting 20 minutes of full motion video featuring the fictional game show host Lance Boyle, played by Christian Eriksen, who is clearly having the time of his life. MegaRace is set in a dystopian future, with its core concept being a violent game show themed around contestants, known as enforcers, driving fast cars in an attempt to destroy various speed gangs. The show's presenter, the aforementioned Lance Boyle, is however keen to note that any and all violence in the show is completely virtual, supposedly. MegaRace's gameplay essentially builds on the format of the Vanishing Point racing game. This was starting to fall out of favour at this point in gaming history, as home computers in particular were starting to get powerful enough for fully three-dimensional polygonal races. But MegaRace did something a little different. Rather than simply rendering the road by two converging lines meeting at the horizon, as in earlier Vanishing Point classics such as Pole Position, Outrun and Lotus Turbo Challenge, it instead displayed the racecourse as a pre-rendered video sequence whose playback speed could be adjusted on the fly to reflect your vehicle's velocity. This made it look and feel new and exciting, particularly because MegaRace's tracks are packed with detail and often take you on corkscrewing rollercoaster style courses. But the core gameplay is right out of a Vanishing Point racer. Anytime you reach a corner, you'll be gradually pushed towards its outside edge, meaning you have to steer around it in order to counterbalance this. MegaRace is about more than just racing though. In fact, racing is probably its least important aspect. Your objective in each event is actually to destroy a set number of vehicles. You can achieve this by shooting them with guns and missiles which have limited ammunition, ramming into them, or overtaking them and getting so far ahead that they automatically explode. To help you on your mission, each course has a number of symbols that you can run over. Some of these have positive effects, which include speed boost and the ability to replenish your weaponry, while others will hinder you, usually by slowing you down. Reaction to MegaRace back in the day was a little bit mixed. Although its impressive multimedia presentation was praised, many reviewers saw right through it to the simplistic gameplay beneath. Assessing the game in the May 1994 issue of PC Zone, reviewer Lawrence Scottford described it as a superb demonstration of what can be done graphically with CD-ROM and how easy it is for gameplay to suffer as a result. I think that's maybe a bit harsh, because MegaRace does achieve what it sets out to do quite well. It never positions itself as anything other than a simple arcade racer, and from that perspective it's quite enjoyable. What's worth remembering too is that the early to mid-90s was a time of considerable growth and expansion in PC gaming. With the platform starting to play host to considerably deeper, more complex games, arcade-style affairs often felt a little bit out of place at the time, and reviewers often clearly wanted the PC to offer something beyond what you could get on a console in gameplay terms, meaning titles with what were seen as dated concepts such as arcade-style immediacy often came in for heavier criticism than they perhaps deserved. I definitely would have had a good time with this back in the day, and having given it a bit of a go more recently, it's one I can definitely see myself going back to when I fancy something I don't have to think about too hard. We finally break free of 1993 with Creative Reality and Empire Interactive's DreamWeb, which came out a year later in 1994. This game fascinated me for numerous reasons. Its overhead perspective, which was very unusual for adventure games at the time, its cyberpunk stylings, its distinctive presentation, and of course its most notorious aspect, the fact that it was one of the first Western PC games to feature full nudity and a sex scene, albeit in teeny tiny pixelated form. That was enough to get it refused classification in Australia. In DreamWeb, you take on the role of Ryan, a young man who has been plagued with strange dreams. These dreams have tasked him with killing 7 evil men, although the diary included with the original release of the game suggests that Ryan is in fact slowly losing his sanity and has fabricated the entire scenario in his head as justification for straight up murder. DreamWeb is a point-and-click adventure game in which you interact with the game world by clicking on items to obtain text descriptions of them, then performing various actions such as picking them up, moving them around, or making use of them for their intended function. One particularly noteworthy aspect of DreamWeb is that each scene is absolutely packed with detail that is largely irrelevant to the main quest. In just the first room, you can pick up and examine pretty much every coffee cup, discarded magazine, book and item of clothing in the bedroom that Ryan and his girlfriend Eden share. The game is set in a dystopian future heavily inspired by Blade Runner and Highlander. While press and public alike had a mixed reaction to the overhead perspective, the game came in for almost universal praise for its overall atmosphere. Its digital music by Matthew Selden and Steve Boynton was singled out for playing a significant role in creating this atmosphere. It also made DreamWeb stand out from other adventures at the time, many of which were still using MIDI synthesis for their soundtracks. DreamWeb is certainly compelling and immersive. Although its presentation is relatively simplistic, it draws you in with its oppressive atmosphere, intriguing premise and high level of interactivity. Its obsession with detail does sometimes make it tricky to know exactly what items are relevant and what are not, plus there are several pieces of information which you'll need to refer to the manual and diary to know, the most notable of which are Ryan's computer password and the commands you can type into network consoles to browse through various file cartridges you'll find. Without having reference material to hand, or foreknowledge of this information, you'll be unable to progress. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, however, nor is it out of character for adventure games of the period. The practice of including feelies, physical objects that are supposedly from the game world, dates back to Infocom's earliest adventures, and it's an aspect that I really miss with the nondescript packaging of modern physical video game releases. Would I have enjoyed DreamWeb back in the day? Absolutely. This is exactly the sort of game I loved in the early to mid 90s, and exploring it today brought back very pleasant memories of the many adventure games I did play back at that time. I never got a chance to try this one, however. I don't even remember coming across a playable demo of it. This is definitely a game I want to explore further, so I'm looking forward to spending some more time with it. Also released in 1994, Al-Qadim, the Genie's Curse is an officially licensed advanced Dungeons & Dragons game published by SSI and developed by Cyberlore Studios. It's a marked departure from most of SSI's earlier Dungeons & Dragons games in that it doesn't stick slavishly to the tabletop rule set, instead unfolding as a real-time action RPG in which you play a preset, albeit renamable, main character. This is a stark contrast to SSI's famous Gold Box games, which ask that players create a party of custom characters using the full Dungeons & Dragons rule set, then use them to complete a quest that unfolds via a combination of first-person dungeon crawling and turn-based strategic combat. It's pretty clear from the outset that the Genie's Curse is taking aim at console-style action RPGs and related games such as The Legend of Zelda, and initial impressions are that it does a reasonably good job of this. Its visuals are good, its music is excellent, and its digitised sound effects are decent enough. It's only the choppy character movement and scrolling that really tips you off that you're playing a 90s PC game rather than a console game from the same period. Truly smooth scrolling in particular is something that continued to elude 2D PC games for quite some time, well after platforms with hardware scrolling like the Commodore 64 and Amiga had fallen out of mainstream usage. It doesn't take long to get used to it, however. The story of the Genie's Curse positions you as the son of a noble family who, at the outset of the game, is just finishing his Corsair training ahead of returning home to marry the Caliph's daughter. Upon your return, you learn that all is not quite right. Monsters have infested the oasis outside of town, and your family and their mercantile rivals are at one another's throats. From here, the game's narrative gradually unfolds as you speak to various people and complete quests. There's a much stronger adventure game feel to the Genie's Curse than the Gold Box D&D games, with most interactions offering you several ways to respond, the supposed correct approach being to demonstrate an honourable outlook on life at all times, which usually provides you with more information and helpful items than if you wander around being a twat. Combat-wise, the game initially appears to be fairly simple hack and slash, with the D&D rules working behind the scenes to calculate hits, damage and such like. The game doesn't provide much in the way of on-screen feedback, which is a bit of a shame, but it's clear the D&D rules are in play at all times, occasionally to a frustrating degree, such as with the wildly variable amount of hit points a healing potion can give back. After dying a few horrible deaths, after the first of which you will remember that this game has no autosave function, it becomes clear that the Genie's Curse rewards slightly more strategic, deliberate play than its initial impression might suggest. Running headfirst into a horde of monsters may seem heroic, but it will likely get you killed here. Instead, a better approach is to try and pick off enemies one or two at a time. Careful movement allows you to bait enemies away from larger groups and take them out with considerably less risk than if you just waded into their midst. Early in the game, there are a few frustrating elements, such as cacti that fire thorny missiles at you and hordes of bugs that you don't seem to be able to defeat. But after a while you'll get to grips with how to spot and avoid these hazards. And it's at this point that the Genie's Curse becomes thoroughly compelling. While offering considerably less in the way of freedom than other D&D games, the Genie's Curse does a good job of, as Computer Gaming World's reviewer put it, giving you a story in which you get to play the main character. In many respects it would have probably been a lot more at home on a console. Its simple control scheme, consisting of nothing but directional controls, a context-sensitive action and attack button, another button for ranged attacks and spells, and a button to open the menu, would have worked very well on joypad. At the same time, having a console-style RPG on PC would have been an exciting and fun novelty in the mid-90s. I know I certainly would have been very much into it. It's not quite Zelda for PC. Even with its real-time nature, it's still a little too beholden to the behind-the-scenes D&D rules for that, and its aforementioned choppy sprite movement and scrolling never lets you forget it's a 90s PC game, but it's an admirable effort to do something a little bit different. So yes, I definitely would have had a good time with this back in the day if I'd had the opportunity to play it. While I didn't really get deep into RPGs until 1997's Final Fantasy VII on PlayStation, I'm pretty sure I had played at least one Zelda game by the time the Genie's Curse came out, and having something superficially similar to play on the family's PC would have been very welcome indeed. Today, there are a few frustrating aspects to the Genie's Curse, most notably the limited combat and its lack of on-screen feedback. But there's enough to like here that makes me feel like I might settle down and put some serious time into this one at some point. The narrative setup is intriguing, the simple interface is effective, and the game has an overall pleasing feel to it that makes me want to play more. So thumbs up for this one then. We did pretty well there then, all told. Most of these are games I'm quite keen to spend some more time with. Lost in Time is probably the one I'm least inclined to go back to, simply because its weaknesses are most readily apparent, but I don't hate it by any means. All the others are titles I greatly enjoyed having a quick look at, and the next time I'm ready to make a start on a new big game, DreamWeb and the Genie's Curse are definitely on the list for consideration. Ken's Labyrinth and MegaRace, meanwhile, are likely to remain more as filler games, perhaps to enjoy over lunch on a workday. This isn't to say they're bad by any means, more that they feel like they'll be more rewarding played in short bursts. So I leave all that with you. If there are DOS games you missed out on back in the day, don't forget many of them are now available through stores such as GOG.com, and those which aren't are part of the awesome Exodus archive, which is well worth taking some time to explore. So for now, it just remains for me to say, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.